From all we can learn about them, these tribes were neither Semitic nor Indo-European, but they were related to each other and they formed one large and complete group or race of people. Gordon Childe writes about it. It is quite clear that the ruling dynasties have been enthroned on the upper reaches of the Euphrates since 1400 BC were Aryans, closely related to those we find in Indus Valley and later in Media and Persia. But their subjects were not Aryans, and the ruling class adopted the language of the natives and the Babylonian alphabet in official use, and it seems that they recognized local deities in addition to their own. The movement that led them to Euphrates did not stop there. In the same period, the tables from El Amarna mention the Aryan rulers in Syria and Palestine, such as Biridava from Yenuam, Shuart from Keilah, Yashdat from Tanakh, Artamani from Zar-Bashan, and others. These dynasties simply ruled over non-Aryan Semitic subjects. In town of Hattusha, after its conquest by Serbian tribes and after it became their capital, there were statues of two bulls in front of the main square. They were indisputably a personification of god Bak, and one of these bulls was named Seri and other Huri, thus symbolically representing the unity of two people, Serbs and Hurits. One Hattush town from that time, 58 kilometers east of Konya, was called Salatuvar. The Mayani says that the Hurits called fighting car Varat, but this is not a Hurrian but a Serbian word, and it was a car in form of small tower in which the archers were protected. The same writer says that the deities of fire and sun are called Agnis by the Hittites, and the goddess Aryan as the deity of the sun, and by Aryans in the east they were Agni, the fire, and Mithras as the deity of the sun. Waddell says, the Aryans in India call themselves Hattiyo. Those old Hatti or Kati, the ruling race of Asia Minor and Syro-Phoenicia, call themselves Ari, which means nobility. Arya or Arya in India has the same meaning. After the famous Battle of Kadesh between the Hattush Emperor Mutawalli and Pharaoh Ramses II on the Upper Orontes around 1288 BC, peace was made between the new Emperor Hattushil and the same Egyptian pharaoh around 1278 BC. Kadesh is the modern Tel Nebi Mind on the upper reaches of the Orontes River. The peace treaty between Pharaoh Ramses II and Emperor Hattushil, called Kheta Sira, mentions the gods of Hattush cities, including the Sutekh of city of Sarpina. Sutekh is Teut in the role of god of war, and Sarpina is certainly Sarbina. The same writer says that Hattushans, that they are Hatti or White Syrians. Strabon also calls the Hatti White Syrians and says that they wore pointed Phrygian hats and big shoes, which some say are typically Gothic, and that the Hattushans were primitive Goths. And we accept this because the Goths are Geti. The Hebrew term Hittite is most commonly used in northern Syria, but Het, the son of Canaan, means southern Syria, and this name is greatly expanded. Joseph Mede says, Caria, Lycia, and part of Pamphylia belong to Kittim or Kitteans. This is plural name, and the singular word would be Kat or Kiti. The Chinese were open to the White Sea and Pelag and could send migrants in both directions. The Kitteans were open to the White Sea and Pelag and could send migrants in both directions. In the first place, it seems that they inhabited Crete and the islands in the mouth of the White Sea. This provides the basis for Daniel's prophecy concerning the Hittite ship that will that will come against Antiochus the Great, as the Romans did. Italy also received one migratory of Chitaeans, which should be on the eastern side of Italy, where it was called Magna Greca, and I think these Chitae go as far as the Tiber on the border of their brothers Hetrushka, and they were the ones who were called Aborigines or Latins, who speak the Old Ionian language, as Varron confirms, and should be considered the migration of the ancient Ionians, because they kept the name of Father Jovan by calling him Janus, whom the Greeks forgot. Janus and Javanus is Jovan. As for the Amorites, there are divided opinions about them. Some even call them Semites, as Edward Dorm, but a more extensive collection of data on them shows them to be Aryans. These data presented by Child speaks in favor of that. Georges Varro says that the Babylonians called in 2nd millennium BC landscape from Euphrates to Pelag Amuru, then that name reduced only to Phoenicia. Judging by the name and its application, we can conclude that the Amorites are in fact people of the sea and coastal areas. The Assyrians called Amorites the area where Damascus is now. Petri connects the Amorites with the Dardanians of Asia Minor. The Old Testament says that God said to Jews, "I destroyed the Amorites before you, who were as tall as cedars and as strong as oaks. I destroyed their fruits above and their roots below. I brought you up out of the land of Egypt and led you 40 years in a wilderness to bring you into the land of the Amorites. When all the kings of the Amorites west of Jordan and all the kings of the Canaanites by the sea know that the Eternal has dried up the Jordan before the children of Israel until we cross, they will lose courage and be amazed at the appearance of the children of Israel." 1 John 5:1. The entry of the Jews into Palestine was around 1300 BC. 5 kings of the Amorites are mentioned in Palestine: Adonizedek in Jerusalem, Hoham king of Hebron, Piraeus king of Yarmouth, Jophia king of Lachish, and Debir king of Eglon. One Amorite city was called Makkedah, which Joshua took. He killed all his people. From this we see that Palestine was held west of the Jordan River, except the coast by the Amorites before the Jews entered it. Amorites and Hittites identify. The names of the Amorite kings are not Semitic. Adoni-Tzadek is Lord Tzadek. The name of the city of Makkedah says a lot about the origin of people who call it Amorites. Ragozin says that the Jews called the original population of Palestine Emim, which means terrible or omnipotent, and the Canaanites called them Zurim. The Canaanite Zurim reached us through the Hebrew language, and they almost regularly changed the initial word Sima from Zita, which means that the name was Surim, as well as the name Suri in Assyria. Mayani says that Manetho wrote that at least 240,000 Hyksos left Egypt and went to Syria, where they built a city called Jerusalem in what is now Judea. From 1500 to 1100 BC, Jerusalem was in the possession of the Hyksos. Avaris is Avariash, a protruding trench, and that is a Hittite word. Funeral customs among the Hittites and Hyksos are the same, writes Mayani. Child says that Aryan names have been completely lost in Palestine since 1000 BC, and even in the area of Mitan there were a few Aryan names left after this date. There the Aryan language fell before the Semitic and Asian dialects, and a few Aryan aristocracies drowned in indigenous people. The Aryan language was maintained further east, on the Iranian plateau and in India. The Hattushans are mentioned on Egyptian monuments as Heta or Hatta. In Assyrian, he also mentions are Hatta and Hatte, and both of these words fully correspond to the Hebrew Het or Hitti, says Sayas. The Egyptian ruler of Hattush is called Hetasar. It literally means Emperor of Heta. This is stated in a first international agreement known in history. It was a treatise on peace and cooperation between Emperor Hattusilo and Pharaoh Ramses II. As for the language of the Hittites, we know that this language was a dialect of the Serbian language and was completely different from the language of Hurits. Gordon Child says that there was a turning point near Hattushan around 2000 BC that before this time that did not have Aryan names. For Nizaean Hets says that they called their language Nashili, which translates as our language on Serbian, that is, our language. Antoine Maya says, the Hattushans called their language Nashili, Neshumli. The language of the first inhabitants, which was not Aryan, they called Hatti. The Nizaean Hatti translated the language of the Hurrian Hattis because they did not understand it. Untranslated names were labeled Huri. The pottery of the lowland Huts was in all respects the same as in Helm Peninsula of that time. As the main deity, they had one god of thunder named Teshuba. Next to the statue of this god stood two holy bulls. No one could find the Hurrian name of this god, and I don't think it existed before the arrival of the Nizaeans, because Teshub is just a copy of the name of god Teut. The two sacred bulls represented the unity of the Serbs and Hurrites under the supreme god Teshub. The treaty between Hattusilo and Ramses for Teshub says, Lord of Heaven, Lord of Trade, and so on, which all suits the god Teut.